Hi and welcome to Swedish Plantguys. In this video we give you 40 tips on the Dracena, also known as the dragon plant. Now all these tips will apply to most varieties of Dracena and are based on our over 20 years experience of taking care of these plants. We will divide this video up into 4 major parts. You have the purchase, the planting, the placement and the care of the plant. But every single tip is listed in the description below with timestamps so you can jump back and forth. But if you watch the entire video, you might just get everything worth knowing. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel for more videos and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Now let's go. One, when you go out to buy a Dracena, know that there are over 200 different varieties of Dracena. In the studio behind me here, we have 11 different varieties. Well, actually we have 12 because in recent years, the Sansevieria, known as the snake plants, are now also Dracenas. So this is not a Sansevieria kirki, this is a Dracena kirki. However, on this channel, we usually say Sansevieria about this type of plants, since that's still the most commonly used name. But there are other genuses as well, as the Pumice genus has also been added to the Dracena family. So now you have almost 300 different varieties to choose from. 2. Now, different types and varieties of Dracena. In the studio here we have 11 different varieties I want to show you. Now all of these have different types of looks. So you need to consider that before buying one. What do I want in my house? Now they can have wide leaves, very, very wide leaves, all the way down to extremely narrow leaves. You can have extremely dark green color, all the way up to variegated with yellow and white and other types of colors in the leaves. And also you have stems that are either brown, green, or you can also choose the ones that are called heads that have no stems, at least in the beginning. So the first one I want to show you here is the Dracena Lemon Lime, and it looks like this. And you can obviously see where it's gotten its name for. It's these very lemon lime-like colorations of the leaves here. And this is actually one of the most sold variegated Dracenas in the world. Then we have this one here. It has a little bit more of a compact look to it. It's still variegated, so it has a little bit of coloration at the edges of the leaves here. Now this is the Dracena Arturo. Moving on, we have this one here. This is also variegated and it has a lot of white in it. Now this is called the white jewel. And this is one of my personal favorites in the Dracena genus. This one here is called Dracena Compacta because it is extremely compact in its way of growing. And as it grows, it continues to be this compact. It has very, very small internodes. That is, the size in between the leaves are extremely small. So it gets this very compact look. This one here, also variegated, but now we have the variegation inside of the main veins here of the leaves. This is called the cinto. This one here is one of the Dracenas we actually use the most inside of offices, inside of homes. Now this is called the Dracena Janet Lind. Now the Janet Lind is extremely similar to another variety called the Janet Craig. And we actually have that one back here. Now the difference between the Janet Lind and the Janet Craig is that the Janet Lind has a little bit of a narrower leaf, and the coloration is a slightly less dark green than the Janet Craig, and I'll show you that one as well. This is a personal favorite of mine. It is in the form of a so-called head. That means it doesn't have a stem, but as it grows, it will get a stem. Now this is the Dracena Charlie, and it's extremely variegated, so this really catches the eye in any room. Now if you like more narrow leaves, the Dracena Maginotta could be a way to go. Now the Maginotta also has different variations that have different variegated colors on the leaves as well. This is the standard Maginotta that is green with a slight hint of red at the edges of the leaf here. So moving on to the larger plants we have here in the studio. As I said before, the Janet Lind is extremely similar to this one, and this one is the Janet Craig. Now the Janet Craig has a little bit wider leaves and is a little bit more dark in color. Otherwise they are extremely similar. Another very nice variety is the Dracena Arturo. Now the Arturo is very similar to the Dorado. It also has these small edges that are variegated on the leaves. However, they are a little bit less variegated from the Dorado. And the last one I want to show you here in the studio is the Dracena Maginotta. This is the Dracena Maginotta. It has extremely wide leaves. It is variegated, and also it has these very nice thick stems as well. And this is a variety that has the brown stem. Number 3, how big and how wide and how full do you want your Dracena to be? Now, when you go out to buy one, you're actually making that decision right then and there. Because depending on how many stems you choose for your Dracena and the length of those stems, you're actually deciding how large your Dracena will be in your house. I'll explain. So here we have a Dracena that is called branched. Now, it's not actually branched in that way, as you can see a Ficus lyrata that has branches coming out from the stems. What we mean in a Dracena that is branched is actually that they've taken a lot of stems, bundled them together and planted them like that. That is called branched in the Dracena world. So we have here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we have 6 stems that are bundled together. Now this will make a Dracena that is extremely full. It has a lot of leaves and no air in between. However, if I choose a Dracena that is planted like this, we have 2 stems that are planted separated from each other. You get an entirely different look. Not to say that one is better than the other, but you need to know that when you buy this plant. And also, the number of stems is important here. On this variety here, we have 2 stems that are planted together, but you could potentially have, as with the Maginotta here, we have 3 stems planted together, which also makes an entirely different look. Now, the last thing is, of course, if you buy something like this that is called a head. Here you don't have a stem. It's basically a cutting planted directly into the soil here. However, know that if you buy a head like this, over time it will start to grow and it will create a stem. You cannot get away from that. Not even from a plant like the Charlie here, which actually looks like it should look like this for a long period of time. It won't. All Dracenas will create stems, or not all Dracenas, because the Sansevierias, the snake plants that are now Dracenas as well, won't, but the original Dracenas like this one here will get stems eventually. Number 4, look at the roots before buying a Dracena. Now the reason for this is that most varieties of Dracena has a smaller root system than a lot of other tropical plants you buy. So it's extremely important to know that the plant you buy has a good root system. Now what we actually recommend you to do is to knock off the pot and take a look at the roots in the shop. What I mean by that is that you just take the Dracena like this. You can hold the stems a little bit so that you're not hurting the plant in any way. Then you just make a quick move, trying to knock off the pot from the roots here. Now let's see what happens. It should look something like this. Now depending on the quality of the plant, the root system here can be quite extensive, or it could potentially just fall apart. Because if there aren't a good root system here, what will happen when you knock off the pot is that all of the soil will just fall apart. So if you are anxious on doing this, I recommend you to tell the staff of where you're buying, let them do it, because they need to show you that you're buying a Dracena that is of good quality, so that when you get home, you won't get problems straight away. And I should point out that the roots should never look black or brown or have a smell to them, because that could be root rot. They should be light brown or almost white. Then they're fine. Number 5, take a look at the leaves. No matter what variety of Dracena you buy, take a look at all the leaves. Take a look on top and take a look under the leaves. There shouldn't be any brown tips or edges of the leaves, any black spots. If there are anything of that kind, then choose another plant that hasn't got that. And also take a look at the newest leaves as well. Because if there are any pests on a Dracena, usually you will find them on the newest leaves. Those are the most delicious parts of the plant. So this is where the pest will attack first. If you see that the newest leaves are shaded or in any way harmed, it could be pests. So then you won't pick that plant, pick another one, or go somewhere else to buy your plant. Number 6, take a look at the stems. Now we have the Maginotta here. Take a look at each and every stem of that plant. And what you want, if it is a good quality plant, is that when they've cut this plant, which they probably did in South America or somewhere where it has been growing in the ground, then they've cut it off right here. Then at the growers, this one has been standing at growers in the Netherlands or in Holland, it has shoot out 4 new buds or 4 new stems from that point. Now what you want is that it has at least 3 new stems coming out from that point. If you have less than that, it could be a lower quality plant. And I want to show you what that looks like. We have a Dracena here that we have been cutting, and we've been cutting it at the wrong time of year, just to be able to show you here that at that cut, you actually only have 1 bud that has been growing out from that point. So you only have 1 bud here and not 2, 3 or more. This is, as I said, an indication of quality. Number 7, Most Dracenas do flower. However, it takes quite a while in your house to make it flower. Usually it takes in between 6 to 8 years before it flowers. Now, we have experienced that it has gone quite a lot quicker than that, but know that it will take some time before it flowers. Now, we put a picture here on what the flower can look like. Now, most flowers in the Dracena family look something like this. The flower itself actually drains quite a lot of the nutrients from your Dracena. So if you know that you have a plant that is thriving, you've done everything we say in this video, it is thriving, it's growing, it's really feeling well, then you could let that flower stay on the plant. But if you know, and I think that's most people, if you know that you're not having a plant that is thriving, you're not doing everything, you're just having a plant because you think it's nice in that spot, you're not taking the time and effort, you're not fertilizing in the right way, then my recommendation to you is to cut off that flower. Because by doing that, you're actually saving the plant. Because if you don't have an energy positive, if it's not feeling really, really well, the flower will drain quite a lot of those nutrients, and it could potentially harm the plant. And the name of most Dracenas are actually Dracena fragrans. Now that name comes from the flower. Most Dracena flowers have a smell to them. Now, some people love the smell, some people can actually get migraines from that smell. So if you know that you don't like the smell, also cut away the flower as soon as you see it. Because then you're not only saving it, you're saving yourself from problem. Number 8, transporting your Dracena from the shop to your house, or if you're ordering your plants online, know that the Dracena is extremely sensitive to cold. So our recommendation is, if you know that it is cold outside, and what I mean by that is that if it is below 10 degrees Celsius or 50 degrees Fahrenheit, make sure that the shop covers the plant in something, paper or plastic, just something that takes the edge out of that cold. And if you know that it is extremely cold, if you have freezing temperatures, you need to take your plant directly into a heated car, or make sure that it is completely covered from that extreme cold, because it can take just seconds or minutes in extremely cold weather to damage your Dracena. Number 9, wait to repot your Dracena. Now, when you get a Dracena to your house, do not repot it immediately, because that plant could potentially be quite stressed. It has arrived in the shop from the growers, it has been moved again to your house, it might have been cold outside, it could be quite stressed. So if you go in and repot your plant immediately, you could actually harm it. So our recommendation is always to wait at least a couple of months so that it can settle in your house before you make a repot. But most Dracenas actually doesn't need a repot until after 1 or 2 years. Because as I said, it doesn't have a massive root system. The root system is quite small, so it doesn't need to be repotted very often. So if you know that it is quite a large pot here, you can actually wait for the first repot 1 or 2 years before doing that. Number 10, so when should you repot? Well, you should always try and repot in early spring or in early autumn. Now the reason for that is that at those time of years, the plant has an energy positive. In early spring, it's getting ready to grow. It has a lot of energy that it has been bulking up during winter when it's dormant. And then when light comes, when heat comes in spring, it wants to grow. If you go in and do the repot then you have a high success rate in not harming the plant in any way in that repot. Same thing in early autumn. It works exactly the same way. But in autumn, most of the growing for the plant is actually going to be in the roots. So if you are in early autumn and do a repot, you're actually setting the plant up for better root growth in that new soil. But we never ever repot in winter because it goes dormant in wintertime. And we never repot in the midst of summer because all of the energy is going to just try and handle that heat. It's just pushing water through the system all the time to be able to handle the heat. So it doesn't need the extra stress of a repot. Now, no matter where you live in the world, because we are in the southern parts of Sweden, in the northern hemisphere here, we have very cold winters and we have fairly warm summers, so there is a huge difference between winter and summer. Now, if you live somewhere where that difference isn't as large, know that the plants still know what time of year it is, because you have differences in light and differences in humidity and temperature indoors. So that slight difference means that the plant still knows what time of year it is. So even if you are in a place where it's hot almost all year around, try and make that repot in early spring or in early autumn to help your plant. Number 11, always use drainage holes in your pots. So when you repot, make sure that you have a pot that has these holes in the bottom. Now the reason is quite simple. The Dracenas are extremely sensitive to standing in water. If they stand in water or if the soil gets to be too moist or too wet, the roots can actually be damaged. So by having these drainage holes, when you water the plant, all of the excess water goes out and away from the pot. So make sure that when you've watered the plant, all of the excess water goes away. Number 12, always when you do a repot, you always move from a smaller pot to a slightly larger pot. What I mean by that is that if you have your plant in this size here, then you want to move up 1 or 2 sizes in a pot, like this. We never take a Dracena and repot it like this, in this huge container here. And the reason is the same as why we use drainage holes. Because if you move it to this very large pot here, what happens is that all of that soil around the roots is going to be moist or wet for a longer period of time. And that could potentially harm your roots. So always move from a smaller to a slightly larger pot. But you could also use the same pot when you repot. You can take out the plant, you can remove all of the loose soil around the roots, and then you can repot with new soil in the same size. That's also fine because you have made a huge difference for the roots, but never up to this large pot. Number 13. Now, what type of substrate should you use for Dracenas? Well, that's quite easy because most Dracenas actually like normal standard planting soil. But there is a big problem with that type of soil. It is usually highly peated, which means that it holds a lot of water. And as I said before, if you have a soil that holds a lot of water for a long period of time, the roots can get damaged. So what I recommend you to do is that use standard normal planting soil, but mix that up 20 to 30% with either Leica pebbles like this. You can also use perlite, which we have here, or you can use pumice, as we have here. All of these 3 types of substrates actually help that soil to get better drainage so that it won't be moist for a long period of time. Now, if you can choose any one of these, we actually recommend pumice because pumice has a lot of different abilities and can help the soil in a lot of other ways than just drainage. But if you want to know more about these substrates, we have a video you can go and watch. Number 14. Dracenas are a perfect species to plant in what we call pure pumice. Now this is not pure pumice. It's actually a mixture of pumice and clay. But by putting your Dracenas in pure pumice, you're actually helping the plant, and the roots will actually grow 4 times quicker in pumice than in standard planting soil. But if you want to know more about pure pumice, we have a video you can go and watch. Number 15. So, what if you want to place your plant in a self-watering pot and you don't want to have it in a standard plastic pot like this? Well, a self-watering pot is actually perfect for Dracenas. Now the reason is quite simple, because when you place your plant in a self-watering container like this, you're actually helping with the drainage in the best of all ways. Because when you water the plant here, all of the excess water is going down into the water reservoir here. And what happens over time is that the Dracena will actually form roots that grow out of these small holes in the bottom here, down into the water reservoir. And those roots will become water roots. So you'll have normal roots within the soil mix here, and you'll have water roots down here. And this is something that the Dracena actually loves, and it thrives by doing that. So if you want to put it in a self-watering pot, go ahead, it works perfectly. Number 16. Now we're moving on to placement of your Dracena. And it's always good to know the origin of your plants. Because if you know where they come from, then you can try and assess what they want and what they like. So most Dracenas actually originate from Africa, from southern parts of Asia, and the northern parts of Australia, which means that it is used to a warm climate and usually with a high humidity. And this will of course affect how we want to place our Dracena. Number 17. Now, what type of temperature do you want to have in your house to be able to make your Dracena thrive? Well, it wants a temperature that is above 18 degrees Celsius, which is about 65 degrees Fahrenheit. And it should be below 27 degrees Celsius, which is 85 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, it can handle temperatures above that, but as soon as it goes above that, it actually gets a bit stressed. And if it goes below those temperatures, it can get harmed. So if you place your Dracena outside in summer, which you can do, it actually works perfectly, but move it indoors as soon as you see that in nighttime the temperatures go below 15 degrees Celsius, which is about 6 degrees Fahrenheit, because that is where it actually starts to get hurt. Number 18, light. Now, depending on where you place your plant in your house, it will get different type of light. So where should you place it? Well, all types of Dracenas actually want a spot that has a lot of indirect sunlight. So it wants a lot of light. But if you place it somewhere where it gets direct sunlight, what could happen is that some parts of the leaves here could actually get damaged. You will get parts of the leaves or edges of the leaves that get burnt. Now they get brown and they get dry brown. So if you see that, it could be an indication that it gets too much direct sunlight. What could also happen over a long period of time if you have it in direct sunlight is that the leaves can start to look shaded. It starts to lose its color. If it's dark green, it will get yellowish green. And if it's variegated like this, it looks like all of the leaves just starts to get faded. that could be an indication of too much sunlight. And also know that a variegated Dracena like this will always want and need more light than a less variegated plant like this. And this wants more light than a non-variegated plant like this. So depending on the type of variegation you have, depending on how much green versus other colors you have, then you know that, okay, this can withstand a darker placement, lighter, lightest, but never too much direct sunlight. Number 19. The Dracena genus is one of the most common plants in the entire world. And one of the reasons for that is that it can actually be placed almost anywhere in your home. That means that it can be placed in a quite dark spot. But I just said that it wants a lot of indirect sunlight. Yes, it wants that, but it can handle darker placements. But know that when you take your plant and you place it somewhere where it's darker, two things will happen. First of all, it will not grow as fast. It will actually be a little bit stunted. It will grow quite slowly. That's not a problem if you have it in the size you want, but know that if you move it to a lighter spot, it will grow faster. And second, what could happen to the variegation of your leaves is that they will start to turn green. If you have it in a very dark spot, your variegated plant could transform into a non-variegated one. Now, if you want to know more about variegation, we have a video you can go and watch and understand what it is and what's happening inside of the plant. Number 20. So where exactly should you place your plant in your home? Now, if we're talking direction here. Now, here we are in the southern parts of Sweden, in the northern hemisphere. So if you live somewhere near here, our recommendation is that you place your plant in an eastern or a western facing window. Because there you get a lot of indirect sunlight, and just a couple of hours a day you get some direct sunlight as well. That is a perfect placement. You could also place it in a northern facing window. That means that it will not get any direct sunlight, but it will get quite a lot of indirect sunlight. Now, we do not recommend you placing your Dracena in a southern facing window, because it could get too much direct sunlight and it could get burnt, or it could also just become faded and look dull. So if you place it, if you only have a southern facing window in your home, make sure that you place it by that window, but you cover the window with something like a very thin curtain, for instance. Just that thin curtain to take that heat from that direct sunlight will help your plant to just thrive in that placement. Now, you could also place it deeper into your home, because as I said, it can actually withstand darker placements. But know by doing that the variegation could get lost and it will not grow as fast. And as soon as you see something on your plant that is not feeling as well, make sure to move it to a spot that is lighter. That's the first thing you do, and then you can see if you can move it back again. Now, if you want to know more about light and placement of your plants, we have 5 quick tips on either of them. We'll put them in the description below. Number 21, humidity. The Dracenas are a genus that likes high humidity, but not too high. It actually thrives in a humidity in between 60 to 80%. Now, that is a problem for us here in the southern parts of Sweden, because even in summertime we have a problem getting our humidity indoors over 60%. It usually is somewhere in between 50 or 60%, but it's not a problem. We know that the Dracena actually can withstand humidity down to around 30%. But if it goes below 30%, then you could get problems. You could get problems by your tips of the leaves could start to turn brown, dry brown. Edges of the leaves could also turn dry brown, and entire stems could just start to collapse. So if you know that your humidity indoors in wintertime goes below 30%, then you need to help the plant in some way. This is by putting in a humidifier in the room. Another way is very simple. Just take a tray, place some pebbles on that tray and add some water, and just place that tray next to your plants. Now that water will start to evaporate and slowly raise the humidity around your plant. Number 22. If you know that you're living somewhere where you get extremely cold weather in winter, that means that you have radiators or other types of heating systems in your house. And those are going to be extremely active during winter. So never ever place a Dracena close to a radiator, at least not in the winter time when you know that it's going to be very, very hot, because that extremely hot and dry air from that radiator could potentially harm your plant. So if you have a placement that is next to a radiator, in wintertime I would move it just a couple of feet or a couple of meters away from that radiator so that the extreme heat from it is not directly next to the leaves. That will help to save your plant. Number 23. Now, as I said before, the Dracenas are extremely sensitive to cold. This means that inside of your house, you need to keep them away from drafts. Now, it could be drafts from windows, it could be drafts from doors, and especially in wintertime if you know that it's very, very cold outside. Now, what happens to the plant if it has a lot of drafts? Well, we have a plant here. Now, this plant has actually been standing for a couple of years in a draft, and as you can see, it's alive. It's not feeling well though. It's actually getting quite damaged. Now, if you take a look at this leaf here, it actually almost looks like if it's variegated, but it's not. These are damages from that draft, and these damages are on almost all of the leaves. So this plant is not looking good anymore. It's alive, but it's damaged. Now, if that draft drops in temperature and gets to freezing, so you have a draft that is freezing cold, then the damages looks quite different. So we'll take you even closer to this plant here. Now, this plant has been standing in extremely cold weather. It was taking out in freezing temperatures for a couple of minutes and in high winds as well. And as you can see here, the cells have actually exploded. That's what's happened here. The water inside of the cells has expanded and the cells has burst, and you get this really damaged look on the leaves. So if you know that you have drafts in your home, make sure to keep the Dracena away from that. And especially in wintertime, if you know that you open and close a window a lot, make sure that your plant is nowhere near that draft. Number 24, water. So how much water should you give your Dracena? Well, that is impossible for me to say, because it completely depends on where you have your plant, all of the factors in your home, the temperature, the humidity, the amount of light, and so on. But more important is, when should you water your plants? And we always water our Dracenas when the top soil here is dry at least 2 inches or 5 centimeters into the soil. So just use your finger and feel the soil down in the pot here. This is actually quite moist, so this does not need any water. But when it is completely dry, 5 centimeters or 2 inches down here, then it's time to water again. So it's all about the frequency on how often you water and not the amount of water. Number 25. If you get your tips of the leaves start to turn brown. And what I mean by brown is actually a light brown and a very dry brown. I'll show you even closer here. It looks something like this. If you get this on your Dracena, and you probably will because this is extremely common, this is due to something we call mechanical damage. Now, mechanical damages mean that it could be placed somewhere where when you walk past it, you actually touch the tips of the leaves. What happens over time is that it cannot push the water all the way out to those tips because those tips are damaged. They are mechanically damaged. It could also be that you have a lot of plants standing very, very close together. And they're actually touching each other all the time, like this. Then you could also get mechanical damage. But it could also mean that your humidity is too low, because the first thing that happens if the humidity is very, very low is that this will happen. The plant cannot push the water all the way out to the tips of the leaves, and these tips start to die. But it is a dry brown that when you touch it, it just crumbles apart. Number 26. If your Dracena gets a brown tip of the leaf, but it also has a yellow line next to that brown, it can be something completely different. Now I'll show you on the detail cam here. It looks something like this. As you can see, it is a tip that is brown, but it also has a yellow, quite clear edge on it. Now this is due to something we call a high mineral water. If you're using tap water for your Dracena, for instance, that tap water could have a high mineral content, like chlorine or fluoride in it. Now, if it gets to be too much, this happens. It pushes those minerals through the plant and out to the tips of the plant, and those tips start to die. So if you have a brown tip with that very, very clear yellow line, what we recommend you to do is try and use something else than tap water. Use, for instance, bottled water, rainwater, or filtered water for your Dracena. And if you notice that this starts to go away, you don't have that problem anymore, then you know the reason why. Now, to clarify, by changing that water and using a different type of water, this will not mean that this will disappear. The damage that has been done will always be there. What I mean is that it will not get more damaged. So what you can do is actually you can cut away those brown tips. Just take a sharp scissor that you've cleaned and just cut it away. Number 27. Now, if your Dracena starts to get brown tips, as we've talked a lot about now, but those brown tips are not crumbly dry, they're actually quite wet or soft to the touch. So they are brown, but they do not crumble when you touch them. Then you have something completely different. What has happened is that your Dracena has gotten too much water. And it's showing you that by the tips are starting to die. So if you get this, make sure that your Dracena dries out completely. I mean bone dry before you start giving it water again. You could also do a repot and make sure that you give it good drainage by using soil and, for instance, pumice or leca to get that good drainage in that soil. Because you probably have a soil that is containing and holding too much water. And the same thing applies here. If you correct all of this, the brown tips will not go away. It is damaged forever, so you can cut away those tips with a sharp scissor that you've cleaned. Number 28. If your leaves start to turn dry brown, and by dry brown I mean they are just crumbly dry, then it's an indication of you not giving it enough water. But what I mean by that is not the amount of water, but the frequency of how often you water. Now I'll show you here on this plant here. This is the Janet Craig. And as you can see here, the oldest leaves of this stem, the oldest leaves are of course the leaves that are closest to the soil here. They are starting to become just crumbly brown, crumbly dry, and just starts to fall off like this. This is an indication of you not giving it enough water, or you're not watering it with the right frequency. Number 29. Now, if you get yellow leaves on your Dracena, it can be one of two things. It can be that you've given it too much water. It can also be that you've not given it enough water. So what we have here is a problem within the soil usually. Now, if you get yellow leaves, our recommendations are this. Take a look at your soil and your soil mix. If you, for instance, haven't repotted your plant in a very long time, it could be that the drainage is not as good as it should be. So even if you water it frequently, it's not getting enough water or it's getting too much water depending on that drainage. So yellow leaves is an indication of too much or not enough water, but take a look at the soil and make sure to maybe make a repot so that you get the good drainage that we talked about under soil. Number 30, if you get black spots on the leaves. Now I'm not talking about the edges or the tips of the leaves, I'm talking about on the leaves. You could have something called root rot. Now root rot is a fungal bacterial problem that attacks the roots, and it means that the plant cannot drink water as it should. So what happens is that it could look something like this. Now, it doesn't have to look exactly like this, but it could look like this. You get black spots on the leaves, and it has yellow edges around those black spots. Now, if you take a look at another leaf here, we have one here, you can see that some of the edges has become black as well. You also have a little bit of a yellow color around those brown. So if you get black spots like this, take a look at the roots to see that you don't have root rot. Now when you take off that pot and take a look at the roots, if the roots have turned black or brown, they are very, very dark in color, it could be root rot. But usually root rot also has a very distinct smell to it. It's an odor that is not very nice. So if it doesn't smell like soil, it's probably root rot. What you do then is that you take away all of the roots that you see are affected by the root rot. Just cut them off, take them away. Then you repot your plant again in good drainage soil, as we've spoken about before. And then you start to water it and take care of it in the same way as we've spoken about before. Then you could be okay. You could get rid of that root rot. Number 31. Now, root rot, as we've spoken about earlier, can also show itself in different ways. One way is those black spots we talked about. But another way, if you're not getting any black spots, but you take a look at your stems and you see that some of the stems, or one of the stems, or all of the stems are starting to turn in color. Now this is what it should look like. It should be green like this. But as you can see here, this stem, something's happening to this stem. It's turning dark brown or almost black. It can also start to shrivel. It gets crevices along the entire length of the stem here. It's actually as if it's starting to implode. This is because of the root rot down in the root system. It cannot drink the water it wants, so it's starting to die. And it could start to die here in the stem and not show you until it's too late on the leaves. We've actually seen this quite often, that the first thing that happens with root rot is that you see the stem is starting to turn. Now, if the stem looks like this, we recommend you to remove that stem completely, because this is irreversible. So as soon as the stem starts to look brown or black like this, remove it from the pot, repot the plant, make sure that you have no affected roots on the other stems here, and then you should be fine. Number 32. If your leaves of your Dracena is starting to become dull in color, it's actually losing some of its color. And what I mean by that is that this Compacta here has a very, very nice dark green color. But if I see that the entire plant here is actually starting to look dull, it can be one of two things. It could be that you have a nutrient deficiency. This means that if you haven't added fertilizer in quite a long time to your plant, it could actually want and need that. And it's showing you by starting to lose the color. It actually means inside of the plant that the chlorophyll is not as active as it should be. So you need to add fertilizer to kickstart that again. But it could also mean that you've placed your plant too light. If it has a lot of direct sunlight on it and it starts to look a little bit dull, it could be that reason. So what I recommend you to do if it starts to look dull in color is to move your plant away from that direct sunlight. If it stands somewhere where it doesn't get direct sunlight, then okay, it should be nutrient deficiency. But there is a little bit of a but here. If you have pests on your plant, it could also show you by some of the leaves starting to look dull. And as I said, some of the leaves. If it's the newest leaves on top of the crown here that starts to look dull, it could be a pest problem. If it's all the leaves at the same time, then you have light or nutrient deficiency. So just by watching and looking at your plants as often as possible, you can determine what the problem is and you can rectify that problem. Number 33, fertilizer. So when should you fertilize your Dracena? Well, the Dracena doesn't need a lot of fertilizer. We recommend you to use fertilizer when you water your plants in spring and in autumn. So another way of saying that is that when your plant is active in spring, all the way to the midst of summer, and then in autumn all the way until winter starts. Those are when it's active. Then you add fertilizer. Just buy a full coverage fertilizer from your local shop, but follow the instructions to the letter.
To the letter.
This is extremely important. Never ever give more fertilizer than recommended on the box you buy. That's the most important thing. It's not important what type of fertilizer you buy. It's important that you follow the instructions to the letter and that you give it when the plant is active. And always remember, fertilizer is not food for the plant. It's actually a supplement. The food for the plant is creating itself through photosynthesis. So if you want to know more about fertilizer and how it works, we have a video you can go and watch. Number 34. A lot of the different types of Dracenas has quite wide leaves, as we have here, for instance, on the Dorado. Now this means that the dust inside of your house is going to fall on the plant and is going to lay here. So what you need to do is to remove that dust. Now the easiest way to do that is just to take a microfiber cloth like this, used for cleaning, just soak it in water and then remove the dust from the leaves. Now you don't have to soak this in water, you can have it dry like this one is, but you have an extra advantage by soaking this in water because you're actually adding some humidity, and you're actually cleaning the plant a little bit better with water than without. But by removing the dust from the leaves, you're actually helping the plant to function properly. But when you're removing the dust, you're actually helping the stomatas on the leaves. These are on top and above the leaves here. You have small, almost like windows that are opening and closing to regulate the water flow inside of the plant. And the dust can actually prevent those stomatas from opening and closing. So when you remove the dust, you're helping the plant to function properly. So if you do this twice a year, it's okay. If you do this once a month, you get 2 thumbs up from us.
You get 2 thumbs up from us.
Number 35. Now, there is another way that you can remove the dust and other particles from your leaves of your plant, and not by using a microfiber cloth or a wet cloth. You could also take your plant and put it in the shower, put it outside and rinse it off with water. It works just as fine, but know this, that I know that a lot of you think that if you spray your plant with water or if you shower it with water, you're raising the humidity around the plant. Well, yes, you're raising it, but you're raising it for a very short period of time. Now, in winter time here in Sweden, we get low humidity. So we want to help our Dracenas to get higher humidity. We do not do that by showering or spraying our plants with water. Because if we want to heighten or raise the humidity, we have to do that a lot. We have to do it every day, perhaps more than once a day for that to work. What we're actually doing is that we're spraying it with water. Then we're not spraying it for, let's say, a couple of days. What's happening is that it gets high humidity for a very short period of time. Then it goes down to low again. Then you spray it with water, it gets high humidity, and then it gets low again. So we get high, low, high, low, high, low. This will stress your plant more than it helps your plant. So if you want to raise the humidity, you do that by a humidifier or by putting some type of a tray with pebbles and water on it so that it slowly raises the humidity all the time. Showering the plant helps the plant to remove dust. It helps the plant to look better, but it's not helping the plant to get higher humidity. Not if you're not doing it more than once a day. Number 36, pruning. If you do everything we say in this video, your plants will thrive and they will start to grow. And eventually they will become too large. So you need to prune them. And don't be afraid, because pruning is a good thing. It helps the plant to thrive, it helps the plant to grow, it helps the plant to thicken and just become more lush. So you want to prune. Now, how do you prune a Dracena? Well, first of all, you need something to cut off the parts that's become too large. So you need a scissor or a prune shearer, but make sure that you clean these properly so that you're not transferring any bacteria or anything else to the plant. Now, when you prune, we have a plant here that could use some pruning. You make sure that you go in and you cut off the stem in between 2 leaves, which is actually in between 2 nodes. Every node is where a leaf is coming out from. So in between 2 leaves, you just make a cut like this. Now, one of the leaves falls off. We can throw that away. But as you can see here, we have a fresh cut. On a Dracena, you don't have to do anything about this cut. It will not bleed, it will not harm the plant. This will callus over on itself. So do nothing. But what will happen eventually here is that it will start to create buds around this area. And eventually you will start to get new stems coming out from this point. So by pruning here, you're actually making the plant thicker. Now I want to add that you can prune a Dracena that has a green stem, you can prune a Dracena that has a brown stem, and you can prune a stem that doesn't have any leaves, or you can prune a stem that has leaves. It almost doesn't matter. Now the most important thing about pruning is that when you do this, make sure that the plant is active and it's feeling well. What I mean by that is in springtime, in autumn, when it's active and you see that it's feeling well, it doesn't have any problems, doesn't have pests, doesn't have any problems with leaves drooping or anything, then you can go in and do this pruning. And by doing it at that time, you will hopefully get 2, 3, or 4, maybe even 5 buds from that cut point that will start to grow, and your Dracena will become thicker and fuller. If you prune at the wrong time of year, it will not kill your plant. It's not a danger to the plant. But what will happen if you prune in winter, for instance, is that it doesn't have the energy to push out 2, 3, 4, or 5 new buds. You will probably just get 1 bud. So your one stem will just become 1 stem. That's the only thing that will happen. So if you have to prune, you can prune any time of year. If you want to prune to make it healthier, bigger, and lusher, you prune when it's active in spring or in autumn. Number 37, propagation. Now, when you've pruned your Dracena, never throw away what you've pruned off, because this is an extremely easy plant to propagate. So what you do with this is that you create a cutting. And the first thing to do when you propagate a Dracena is to take off some of the older leaves. So this is the top of the cutting here, and this is the bottom. So we start by removing leaves from the bottom. And you can just pull them off, but make sure that you don't break the stem, because then it won't work. So hold it tightly and just prune off the leaves like this. Now what you want is that you want to keep somewhere in between at least 1 leaf, but usually 3 to 6 leaves. You want to keep on top here. So I'll just continue to prune these off. Now, let's see, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 leaves left and 1 baby leaf here. This should be fine, because if you prune off all the leaves, the cutting cannot function properly and it will die. But if you have too many leaves on here, it will take too much energy from the little energy that this cutting has to maintain these leaves, and it will not focus on giving you new roots. So by just having somewhere in between 2 and 6 leaves, it usually works perfectly. Now, you can remove those leaves and you have your cutting here. Now, I'm going to place this cutting into water. Now here in Sweden, it's fine to just use tap water, but if you know that your water is not very clean, then I recommend you using bottled water, some form of filtered water or rainwater for this, because otherwise it could rot down here by the roots and it will not work. Now, before I place this in water, the last thing I do is that I make a clean new cut. So make sure that just before you place it into water, now I have a couple of different types of vases here. I'll see which one will work. I think this will work. So this is just tap water here in Sweden, cold water. I make a new fresh cut. Now the nodes are everywhere on a Dracena. Every line you can see here on the stem is actually a node where a leaf has been coming out from. And it's from these nodes that you will get the new roots. So you want to have at least 1 node in water. But with a Dracena, that is not a problem because we will probably have water this far up down the stem here, so we'll have a lot of different nodes in water. But I'll cut off because I want a fresh cut before I put it in water. So when you've made this cut, make sure to place it directly in water. And I make the cut in between two nodes. Then I place it in water like this. Now this is all you have to do. You place this cutting and this vase with water somewhere where it gets a lot of indirect sunlight. Do not want direct sunlight anywhere near this, because then all of the water that's been transporting inside of the plant will just try and regulate that heat. You want every focus here to be on creating new roots down by the bottom. So you place it somewhere where it gets a lot of indirect sunlight, and then you exchange this water every day. And you exchange the water every day until it starts to show you some roots. Then you can move, as I've done here, on this Dracena here, that has actually started to show roots. And as you can see here, it has quite a lot of roots down by the two nodes at the bottom, and then it's actually pushed out some roots up until where the water level is. And you want that. So make sure that you have quite a lot of water on the stem here. But when it looks like this, you can start to exchange this water every week. You don't have to do it every day. So when is this cutting supposed to be a new plant? When is it ready? Well, when the roots are starting to become at least 2 inches or 5 centimeters long, then you can consider this being a plant. But it could be even longer. We've planted cuttings that have had roots that are up to 4 inches or 10 centimeters long. But at least 5 centimeters or 2 inches before you transfer this to soil. Now, when you pot this into soil, you can use any type of standard planting soil. Make sure to mix it up with perlite, pumice or leca, just as we discussed in the soil episode here, to make sure that it gets good drainage. And in the beginning, when it's starting to transfer from water roots into soil roots, make sure that it's a little bit moist at all times. Now, do that for at least 2 months. After 2 months, you can start to consider your plant as or your cutting as a finished Dracena new plant. Now, in the beginning of this, I said that it's very easy to propagate a Dracena by just making a cutting like this. So it's actually as easy as you could take this cutting and just push it down into soil. You could actually push it down into the same soil that you have your mother plant here. And it could start to show you roots and just start to continue growing. It's actually as easy as our experience is that 8 times out of 10 you have success. But if you do that, if you push it down into soil and not water, what I recommend you to do is that when you make that final cut before you put it in water, if you're putting it into soil, you make that cut in a diagonal like this. So that you make sure that you have almost as a pencil here. Because when you push this down into the soil will not clog or not hinder where you want it to start to drink water. Because this will actually push the soil around so it comes easier down into the soil. So you're actually helping yourself to succeed even better. Number 38, pests. Dracenas are not very often attacked by pests, which is a good thing, because if your plant is feeling well, you're actually doing everything we say to you that you're going to do in this video, you will most likely not get pests, but you need to look for them all the time. Now, why do we get pests? Well, usually it's because your plant is not feeling well and because the humidity around the plant is going down or going up. When you have a change in humidity, this triggers the pests to actually hatch and start to attack the plant. Now, on Dracenas, it's our experience that it's most likely to be spider mites or some other type of mites. Now, we've had scale, we've had mealybugs as well. We've also had trips on Dracenas, but here in the southern parts of Sweden, it's almost always some type of mite. Now, the problem with mites is that they are so small that you can't see them with the naked eye. So when you start to see that you have pests, you have a lot of them. So make sure to take a look at your plants. Every time you water them, take a look at them. And especially the newest leaves on top of the crown here. Take a look to see if they have their color. If they start to look a little bit faded, or if they start to look unwell in any way, and it's only the newest leaves here, then you have probably the beginning of a mite problem. And if you start to take care of those mites, then you have a very high success that you will get rid of them and it will not harm the plant. But if mites get to all of your plants, it is much harder to get rid of them, and you will probably see that you have damages on your plants after that. Number 39. As I said before, the most common problem with pests on a Dracena is mites. But there is a very, very simple way of taking care of mites. So if you have looked at your plant and you see that, okay, the newest leaves are starting to become pale, something is wrong, then what you can do to easily get rid of those mites is that you take them into your shower, or you take them outside if that's possible, if it's not too cold, of course, and then you take your hose or your shower and you rinse off the leaves of the plant. Now, you do not want the soil to get too wet, so you can take a plastic bag over here and just cover the soil. But you rinse off every leaf of the plant. And you make sure that you rinse the top of the leaf and the bottom of the leaf, or the underside of the leaf. So everywhere. And then you do that once a day for 2 weeks. Because when you do this the first time, you get rid of all the active mites. They cannot hold on to the plant when you rinse it with water. So they get knocked off the plant. But the eggs are still there because they are attached to the leaves. So day 2, the eggs will hatch. There will be a lot of new mites on the plant, but you take it into the shower again, you shower it off, and all of those will also be away. By doing this every day for 2 weeks, you will get rid of all the mites and you will have no eggs left. So this is just the easiest way to get rid of mites. But if you do not have the possibility to do this, we recommend you to buy a pesticide. Go out to your local shop, tell them that you have a problem with pests, buy some type of brand, and then follow the instructions to the letter.
To the letter.
Never do anything other than what it says on that box, because you could potentially harm the plant more than helping it. Number 40. So is the Dracena a poisonous genus? Well, it's not considered to be poisonous for humans. If you have one of these leaves, what will probably happen is that your stomach will react. You could vomit, you could potentially be a little bit sick, but it's not poisonous so that you will die from it. So it's not rated as a poisonous plant for humans. But if you know that your child has eaten something from your plant, make sure to get it checked and tell them what's happening, of course. However, the plant is a little bit more poisonous to pets. So if you have cats, dogs or other pets that you know are a little bit curious, could be there and nibble or bite from your plants, then make sure that they are out of reach, because if they eat from the leaves, they could actually get a little bit sick. They will probably not die from it, it's not that poisonous, but they will get sick and you will have to take them to a vet to check them out and help them. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. That really helps our channel a lot. If you haven't subscribed to our channel already, please do. Hit the bell as well so you get a notification every time we put up something new. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram where you can get sneak previews on upcoming videos and sometimes a little bit more. Now until next time, hej då!